Welcome back, everybody. Happy Whiskey Wednesday. This is the Whiskey Lifestyles Women in Whiskey series. I am Rashawn Hall, aka Bar Time Stories. And this week we are pleased to have the founder of the Black Bourbon Society, Samara Davis, with us. And we're going to talk a little bit about being Black in bourbon, whiskey, all the amazing things that she has done with this community that she has found and really cultivated via social and in real life. So Samara, welcome to the Whiskey Lifestyle.
Hi guys, thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you, and thank you for all the work that you've done in the space. So you are the founder of the Black Bourbon Society. Tell us a little bit about the Black Bourbon Society and what inspired you to create this space.
Well, the Black Bourbon Society is an organization that I started 6 years ago when I realized there wasn't a lot of diversity and inclusion within the spirit space. And it's been a labor of love. We're going on celebrating our 6th anniversary in the next couple of days here. And, you know, really back then when I started it, I really just wanted friends to drink whiskey with. And I saw some glaring holes in the industry. And I wanted some folks to drink whiskey with, and I wanted to prove the industry wrong. I wanted to prove that we did exist. And since then, we have done several activations all across the country. We have worked with the brands in a number of ways, digitally, virtually, of course, in person. Lots of educational opportunities, lots of trips to Louisville with members. And we've grown our audience to almost 30,000 members across the country. So, yeah, this has been a labor of love. And I can finally say, like, I think we're making progress. And I think we've made an impression on this industry.
Okay. So tell us about your whiskey journey. How did you get into whiskey? What was your gateway whiskey?
My gateway whiskey was a bad relationship with my ex-husband.
Oh, okay. Oh, fair enough.
No, you know, sorry, excuse me. I was a wine drinker initially in my early 30s. I'm in my 40s now. But in my 30s, I drank a lot of wine, but my ex-husband was into bourbon. And I started drinking bourbon, trying to connect with him. And I realized, like, oh, you know, of course I fell into the stereotypes of what bourbon is. Like, oh, it's brown liquor. Oh, it's gonna burn my chest. Oh, women really don't drink that. Like, I had subscribed to all the stereotypes, all the misnomers about the spirit, not really knowing what it was, just going off of what I heard other people say. But when I started drinking whiskey with him and started making cocktails with it, I realized how amazing of a spirit it was. And I fell in love with the process of it. I fell in love with the fact that you can take something as simple as corn, you know, yeast and water, and put it in a barrel for a certain amount of time, and it comes up with these wide variety of flavors. So that's how my journey started, was off of that. But then I quickly fell down this rabbit hole of wanting to try more, wanting to taste more, wanting to pick up the nuances between different barrels and different brands. And I fell in love with it.
Okay. So I love that he, you know, good, bad, or otherwise, he introduced, and then you took it and ran with it. So when you got into that spirit, and it's interesting you say that. So my wife is into wine, I am into whiskey. We often have that conversation, and she's like, I'm sick of going to distillery tours, and I'm like, I will keep going to wineries. I don't love it the same way I do, but what was it about? What was that first, like, tell me about that first distillery trip, or that first distiller, or spirit that changed the game for you?
Well, my first whiskey that I ever drank was Four Roses single barrel. So I came at a pretty high level, like, yeah, off the bat, 100 proof. Really falling in love with the good stuff. But I quickly, you know, again, I love Four Roses. Heaven Hill is still my favorite. So I found a bottle of Henry McKenna before it got super duper expensive and rare. And that was like my go-to sipper. Actually, I drank Henry McKenna all the time. I made cocktails with it. I drank it after work when I was living in California. That was really like my go-to bottle. But then, I started this business back in 2016. I didn't go to the distillery until 2018. That was the first time I had ever been to Kentucky. So I had started this business sight unseen. And it wasn't until 2 years in that I had finally had an opportunity to actually go to Kentucky and see what the distilleries look like and have this amazing experience in the distilleries, in the rick houses. And that is completely mind blowing and just made me fall more in love with it. The smells, the sounds, the dust, just these massive warehouses full of barrels of whiskey. All of it is really a sight to behold. So, yeah.
And I think what's interesting is for me is the story. To your point, it's all those sights, sounds, but it also like just the whether it's a familial story, whether it's just a story of like hardship and inspiration, meeting ingenuity. When you decided to, and which also kind of brings you back to Black Bourbon Society, when you decided to say, I want to drink with my friends. I want to find a space for us in that. When did it become beyond just, okay, you like that, you like that Four Roads, a single barrel, to I'm going to actually build a community of people who look like me, who know my experience, and are going to drink this brown liquor that is not cognac?
So it kind of went hand in hand, right? I'm sorry, I've got a sample that I'm supposed to be drinking, but it feels more.
It's all good. I was going to ask.
We'll get to it. It's some new. It's a new.
Okay.
That kind of went hand in hand, right? Like I was drinking bourbon. I had my own business in the Bay Area, so I consulted and produced events, and I mostly for nonprofit organizations and small businesses in the Bay Area back in 2015, 2016, and I produced this event for a friend. And at that event was a woman who was brand new to the area. And literally the name of the event was like, You Need New Friends or something like that. It was a brunch we did. And one of the women at this brunch worked for one of the brands. And she was new to the area and she needed a friend. And so I told her what I did. I told her that I was falling in love with bourbon and that I'd love to work with her and her agency to help her get her footing and get familiar with producing events in the Bay Area. And through that experience, I started doing some third-party work with her. And then and during that process, again, being an event planner, having that event production experience, I asked her, well, who am I producing these events for? And it was then when I realized that there wasn't any activations, that were consumer marketing, engagement events, experiences that were specifically geared towards consumers of color. It was more like if you saw consumers of color, it was more towards the urban demographic, which is great, right? But I'm a much older person and I don't necessarily identify with the urban demographic anymore. That urban demographic is kind of like that 20 to 25-year-old, they're gateway drinkers. Those are the bottles with the sparklers in it. Shut down the club, like branded shot glasses, that type of a situation. And it really I didn't identify with that. And I didn't think that my friends and the people that I wanted to drink bourbon with fit that stereotype, I guess, or that personality. So that's when I did create Black Bourbon Society. And it was really out of honest conversations with her and really kind of getting some insight on the brands. It's like, how do we make these premium luxury bourbon tasting experiences like bourbon dinners and tastings and educational opportunities? How do we provide those same type of experiences for diverse audiences? And there was a little pushback in the beginning, and there was a little like, well, we didn't know there was a premium diverse audience, which is nonsense. And then it was all about, okay, well, I'm going to create Black Bourbon Society to prove to you that we do exist. And so again, 6 years in, I think we've made quite an impression on this industry. And I think we've changed the way that brands work with audiences of all diversity, of all ethnicities. Honestly, I think they no longer rely on what statistics say or what's in somebody's textbook, but they're becoming more in tune. They haven't perfected it yet, but they're becoming more in tune of like, what it means to be, diverse, and how it to appropriately connect with diverse audiences of all types.
So, and it's interesting that you say that there is such a there's what you assume whiskey looks like as someone who is bald headed with a beard, and I don't have my glasses on now, but it's like you assume whiskey is a certain thing. And right. Being a woman and being a Black woman, there is a that, like you said earlier, like, oh, it burns, all those suppositions that people put on whiskey. Right. And honestly, sometimes I've had my own friends who are like, I don't like whiskey, and I make them a cocktail, like, oh, this is delicious, and like, you're drinking whiskey. There right. is, so some of it is our own thing, but what was the initial response from us, from the African American audience, as you built out the Black Bourbon Society, when you started to find that like-mindedness, that kinship? Tell me a little bit about what, you talked a little bit about kind of what the brand experience was like. What was the experience like from a consumer side, from a finding an audience in a community? What was that like?
It was exciting, and it was scary at the same time, because I didn't know how the audience would necessarily, resonate to this. If it was just a me thing, or if it was actually a need. I didn't know that when I started Black Bourbon Society. I just wanted to do it. And there was also some intimidation on my part, because again, I was, kind of buying into these stereotypes that are out there. Like, well, what would people think? I'm a Black woman who drinks whiskey, who has small kids, who's married. Like, I kind of put myself in a box in the beginning at first, but I haphazardly introduced Black Bourbon Society to my friends. I tried to run it in anonymity, and I don't know how to work social media that well, and it ended up posting on my personal page. So all of my friends, like, I outed myself. But so in that shame, and in trying to like deal with all these stereotypes that I placed on myself, I surprised and shocked myself, because everyone was so supportive and so excited. And they were just like, oh my God, I've been drinking bourbon for this long. I collect it. I love bourbon. I didn't know other Black people drank it. Like, we were all doing this in the closet, and me creating this society, creating this safe space for us to all come out and say, like, yeah, let's do this together. Let's learn about this. Let's start collecting. Let's start trying different samples. Let's really get into the spirit. Like, that really pushed me. And that was something that, like, I didn't anticipate. It was something that completely caught me off guard, but motivated me to even go harder, to push this idea harder and really make it something big, because the audience itself wanted it and demanded, and still demands, that I create stuff just for them, that I push the envelope, that I grow the audience, that we do more trips to Louisville. Like, it's that type of a business where I've got my business plan, I've got my strategy, and then the audience, the membership, dumps even more on top of that, and we have to meet their need on top of the needs of the brands.
Okay. So to that end, it's interesting. It's called the Black Bourbon Society. It's not called the Black Whiskey Society. Why bourbon and not whiskey as a more broad category?
Well, Black Bourbon Society, first of all, it rolls off the tongue a lot easier.
Okay.
And truly, that was my introduction into the space. I loved bourbon, and I fell in love with it. And it's America's native spirit. And it really only made sense to me, like, okay, this is America's native spirit, yet it's not being marketed and communicated to Americans properly. And like, we still find ourselves, I've had several epiphanies over the past 6 years with this, but we are still having a really hard time defining what it means to be American in the spirit space. So we stick with Black Bourbon Society, just because it is America's native spirit. And if it is America's native spirit, then it needs to be and should be inclusive.
Absolutely. And I think one of the interesting things that building on that is that Black Bourbon Society as I was aware, and as the Facebook group began to grow, it was right in parallel with like the evolution of the Uncle Nearest story and people becoming more familiar with that story. To your point of like inclusivity and what the American whiskey space is. Can you tell me, as you talked a little bit earlier about like brands becoming more open to understanding that their consumers are not just 40-year-old white guys, that tell me a little bit about what those life lessons or what those experiences or epiphanies have been over this journey for you.
Well, that's a loaded question. Some of the brands get that, right? So some of the brands get that they need to be more diverse. Often when I'm talking with a brand and I'm consulting, whether if it's to create some experiences for them or if it's to consult with them on internal D&I issues, we start off with a business case. And again, my business case is simple. Look at look at the census records. So if your audience is predominantly middle-aged white male, in the next 10, 15 years, you're not going to have that audience base. Like, it's simple as that. Like, we know that the minorities in this country are becoming more of a majority on the census records, and that the percentage of white males in this country is dwindling down. So if you're a bourbon brand, or if you're any brand for that matter, and you're literally hanging your hat on one demographic that is slowly becoming smaller and smaller, then you're going to be out of a job in the next 20 years. And from that conversation, that's when you start to see like, oh, let me straighten up my back. Let me actually listen to what you're saying. And that's not a number. That's not a scary tactic. That's just what reality is. And I think, and people know that that's reality, because that's why our politics are going bananas right now. You know what I mean? So like, that's very real and very factual. And that is a very real concern for the majority of Americans. But with that being said, like, that's the business case. And that's an opportunity to say, okay, look, now we get to sit back and we say, how do we genuinely connect with other audiences? Because yes, you know that there's a Black demographic, an Asian, a Latino, a LGBT, a female demographic. You know, you've got these other subcategories that all love and support the whiskey industry, yet you're not really going above and beyond any measure to connect with this audience. And if you do, you're often doing it in a way that is offensive, right? Or disingenuine. So how do we create genuine, real connections with these audiences in a way that draws them in, that continues to push the mission of the organization forward and makes them loyal consumers? So that's the work that we're doing with these brands. And some get it. A lot of the newer craft distillers, a lot of these smaller brands that have popped up, much more leaner in staff, they are going into this industry knowing that they need to be more diverse and knowing that they need every single consumer, that they can't rely on one demographic over the other. So they're a lot of fun to work with because they're open to any and all ideas. But some of the larger conglomerates that have been around for hundreds of years and have done things a specific way for decades, for again, hundreds of years, or that are owned by larger organizations that might not even be American companies themselves, they're the ones that are very slow to the race. And they know they have an issue, but the ship is too big to turn around and make change. Yeah. So that's where we're at. I don't know if I answered your question.
No, absolutely. No, that definitely answered my question. I think one of the other things that Black Bourbon Society does, and it is really interesting, is the community element. So the salon that you had in Harlem recently, talk a little bit about the importance of community. And I feel like, there's nothing better than enjoying any spirit, but in particular, because we're talking about whiskey, there's nothing better than enjoying whiskey with friends or with family or in a communal experience. Talk about the importance of community in what you do.
Well, community is everything, right? And again, it's building genuine engagement and it's building genuine connections. So it's not just like, oh, hey, we're this brand and we're throw a party for Black people and have them show up, drink our products, and then go home with a T-shirt. Like, no, it's got to be something that's impactful, something that resonates with the community, something that really has some sort of lasting impression with the attendees that participate in this experience. And so that's how we craft our campaigns, right? This is how we curate our experiences for our audience, for broader audiences, and for the brands. It's really like, okay, we want to take this product. And it's as simple as that product. The event that you're referring to was for Jack Daniel's Single Barrel, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like, okay, Jack Daniel's Single Barrel is on everybody's shelf. Like, you can purchase it. It's $50 on the shelf near you. But how do you connect? How do you connect the community, or how do you draw in new audiences in order to really create an experience with that spirit and to really understand it on a deeper level? You create something like a Salon 7 during Black History Month at a Black-owned venue that speaks about the product itself. So, we're learning about Jack Daniel's, and we're sipping Jack Daniel cocktails, and we're learning about the product, but we're also having this conversation about these movers and shakers in New York that are really exemplifying the level of excellence and ingenuity, right? Just parallel to the ingenuity and excellence that's in this bottle, right? The liquid form of that. So we have this audience that is engaged in this dialogue that really means something to them. How can they be better stewards and community leaders, entrepreneurs in their own cities, in their own communities? They're networking with each other. So they're passing business cards. They're, following each other on Instagram. They're creating connection that they can follow up with at a later date. And they're also having a really good time. They're experiencing food from a Black-owned restaurant, and they're having amazing cocktails. Like, that's an experience that most people won't forget. And it's all tied back to Jack Daniel's Single Barrel. So, like, that's genuine connection. That's genuine engagement from the brand, because the brand is not only just there to push their product in front of our audience, but they're also there to deposit value and knowledge and connection and connectivity beyond that event.
Absolutely. And I definitely walked away with that. I walked away with the Jack Daniel's contact. So thank you. So thank you for that. So what, so you said, this is a six years in. Where do you see Black Bourbon Society going? What is I'm not going to ask what the end game is. What do you want to, what's the next thing? Where do you want to go next?
So the next thing is, we're no longer proving, like I said, like, I created Black Bourbon Society out of this need to prove that we exist. Like, I'm very confident that we have shown this industry that we exist. And so we're not proving, we're just executing, and we're doing. And we're we're continuing our advocacy work, and we're holding brands accountable. For BBS, we've grown so large, and we have so many capabilities that we're actually kind of splitting apart our company. So Black Bourbon Society will continue to be membership based, and it will continue to house our community of 30,000 members. We'll continue to grow that. But really the engine, the behind BBS, right? Like, creating these amazing experiences that you just talked about, and doing the consulting and that we do with the brands on how to be more diverse and inclusive with diverse audiences. That's now going to be translated over into a new company that we started called Society Marketing Group. And that agency will continue to grow, and grow. And it'll allow us to, not only continue, like, it'll continue to, foster the bourbon community, but it gives us some leverage to get out of that and to go into all whiskey categories, into all spirits. But looking at our demographic, we know that African Americans just don't like one thing. You know what I mean? Like, they're not just hardcore bourbon drinkers. They're hardcore bourbon drinkers. They are very super conscious consumers. They like luxury goods. They like premium products. They like premium cars. They like to travel big. We do everything big. So that demographic really needs to be litmus, right? It needs to be an example, almost a white paper for other industries to really see how do we genuinely engage again with an audience just like this. And we're hoping that S&G will be that agency that will continue to create experiences for this demographic beyond the spirits industry.
Okay, cool. All right, so we always like to end every interview with just a couple fun questions. So the first one is, if you could have a pour of whiskey with anyone dead or alive, who would it be and why?
Oprah. I should probably say my grandmother, my great grandmother. So my great grandmother apparently had a whole closet full of whiskey. She called it brown. So I should say her, but no, alive, I would say Oprah. I want to drink whiskey with Oprah. I know she's a big tequila fan, but I think I can convert her, and we can do it in her lovely garden in Santa Barbara. So
okay, all right. And lastly, so I always ask people who are in this space who working with whiskey, working spirits for a living, or that is their bread and butter, so to speak. What do you do when you're, what does downtime look like? How do you balance that work-life balance when, for most people it's, oh, I'm gonna have a glass of whiskey because I'm stressed out at my 9 to 5. When your 9 to 5 is whiskey, what is that? What does downtime look like for you?
Ginger shots. Again, like I got these samples that I get these all the time, and I actually had a tasting of it, and I didn't feel like drinking again, because when your job is whiskey 9 to 5, like you don't have time to start sipping, right? Like you're working. So I just listened into the presentation and got all the notes and questions that I needed, but I actually never drank the product. So in my downtime, I'm with my kids. I'm with my husband. I'm trying to catch a nap. I'm not always sipping on something. I still am a big wine drinker. And so, I drink a bunch of whiskey. I do my tasting notes and all that stuff, but I want to clear out my palate. I just really want a good bottle of wine, so.
Okay, there you go. Well, Samara, thank you so much for doing this. It's always a pleasure. I've been, following Black Bourbon Society for a long time, and I'm glad to have you on here talking about being a woman in whiskey. So thank you so much. And cheers, everybody. Thank you so much.
Cheers. Thank you for having me.